Okay, so the first thing we're going to look at when we talk about current modern Caribbean South America is some of the big issues that are happening in there. And some of the major issues that people have to deal with on a daily basis are listed right here. The first one is volcanic activity. There are many earthquakes and eruptions from the volcanoes that are happening because they are right along the edge of two tectonic plates, and so obviously this causes danger to people, but it's also kind of a almost a good thing because the ash and different things from the volcanic eruptions make the soil rich and fertile. So around those volcanoes, it's dangerous to live if an eruption happens, but otherwise, as long as the eruptions aren't happening, it's the best farmland in the area. Another major issue in the area is political conflicts, and there are conflicts like civil wars and constant changes of leadership and all kinds of stuff that often turn really, really violent. But either way, whether it leads to violence or not, it definitely leads to the economy and the government being very unstable. So instability, meaning it's always changing and people don't know what's happening, and it can't ever really get a grip of where it's trying to go, the government. The last one is ethnic divisions, and ethnic divisions means a couple of groups of people are kind of fighting for power, okay? And this is happening in Guyana and Suriname mostly, and it's happening between Asian people and African people. And so there's this battle back and forth over who has the power in those smaller countries. However, generally, life is getting better. You know, they're trying to develop their economies. They're trying to build themselves into a more stable, democratic type of a government, but it's slow going. And so, even though it's improving, they still have a long way to go. So what is the culture like in these countries? The culture in these countries is pretty similar, most of them, to the culture of Latin America. And Latin America is that area where the Spanish, the Portuguese, and the French had their influence, and it ran all the way from Mexico all the way down to the bottom tip of South America. So it's a very, very big area where we're going to talk about a lot of similar cultural things. And so in Colombia and Venezuela, that typical Latin American culture is there. They're Spanish speaking from their Spanish heritage, as well as Roman Catholic religion. However, if you look at the other countries, they're a little bit different. So Guyana, they speak English, and it's kind of mixed in with a Hindustani, which is this is the Asian people that we talked about before that were in this ethnic conflict, are the Hindustani people from India. Okay, and then in Suriname, it's a Dutch history mixed with mostly Hindustani people. And then in French Guiana, it's that French mix with many Asian cultures being present there. And so throughout all of this area, there are also many African and native cultures present. Okay, and sometimes that can cause conflict between the different ethnicities. And now I want to talk about the environmental problems in Caribbean South America, because there are many of them. Okay, one of them is deforestation. Deforestation is a problem in all of these countries. It's also a problem kind of all around the world. And because of a worldwide demand for wood, whether it's to make paper products or make furniture or make houses or whatever they need to use the wood for, there's a ton of it being harvested, and we're taking away the trees that allow us to breathe and give animals their place to live. There's a lot of different things that trees do for us, and it's dangerous to be taking all of them away. And so that's one big problem. Another big problem is the commercial farming pollution. There's a lot, because it's warm all year long, there are a ton of insects, and they get really, really big, and they're kind of massive insects. And so the farmers in this area have to use a lot of pesticides. And a pesticide is essentially a poison that kills bugs. But however, usually the pesticides are also damaging to humans. And so what happens is the pesticides get sprayed on the field, and then the water or the rain comes down, and they're it washes away the pesticides, and the rain and pesticides mix, and then it all washes away down into the water, which pollutes the water, making the fish unsafe to eat in some cases, and making the water unsafe to drink, be in, anything. Okay, and so the commercial farming pollution is causing a lot of issues. There also is major oil industry pollution, like you guys read about when you read about Lake Maracaibo. Lake Maracaibo is extremely polluted from all of the oil in Venezuela. Because it's a small lake, and there's these kind of janky pipe systems set up underneath it that's leaking into it, and oil's leaking into this lake, and there's only a tiny little narrow channel that drains the pollution, that drains the water out of there, and so it kind of stays in there, and it gets more and more polluted as you go on. So as you're reading about it and actually you'll learn a lot more about that. The last one is subsidence, and subsidence is an issue, and this bottom one's a picture of subsidence. The top one is a picture of Lake Maracaibo, but the bottom one is a picture of subsidence, and subsidence is when the ground is sitting on top of a chunk of oil, of a field of oil, and that oil starts to be drained. Nothing is holding up the ground anymore in that area, and so that whole portion of ground starts to sink, and it sinks down below, okay, and it gets to be lower and lower and lower, and it can be extreme like this picture is, or it can be a little bit less extreme, but either way, even if it goes just a little tiny bit lower, when the rains come, when the rivers flood over and things like that happen, these are the areas that get flooded, and homes are ruined, and oil fields are destroyed, and there's lots of different problems with subsidence. Okay, the areas are trying to fix the problems. In Venezuela, they have put together the Organic Law of Environment to try and protect the environment. Okay, and then there are many areas throughout Caribbean, South America that have been added as their countries into protected nature preserves. So places where humans are not supposed to settle and are not supposed to do certain things that could be damaging to the environment. These countries also have very different governments from each other, and it's kind of seen a little bit right here in Colombia and Venezuela. Colombia has three branches set up, and the three branches are the executive, the legislative, and the judicial. So we've already talked about these many times. It's a lot like the United States. They also have two houses of Congress, and those houses are the Senate and the Chamber of Representatives. So just like the United States, but the United States, ours is called the House of Representatives, not the Chamber, but the same thing. Okay, they also have two parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives, just like the United States, where we have two major parties, which are the Democrats and the Republicans. So the government of Colombia is very similar to the United States. Okay, Venezuela, however, is different. Okay, they have kind of reduced their representative democracy that they had and kind of turned it into a direct democracy. And the way that they run a direct democracy, which there are very few of these in the entire world, is to change their laws, they have a referendum. And a referendum literally means that every single person votes on it. So it goes onto a ballot, and everybody comes out and they vote on whether the law should change or not. We've had some referendums in the past here in Minnesota. If you remember the gay marriage referendum in Minnesota, it was vote no and vote yes. You saw the vote no stickers all over the place, and so that was where the people of Minnesota actually got to vote on whether they wanted to recognize gay marriage as marriage or not. Just like this, where the people get to vote on whether the law should go through or not. The smaller countries have different governments as well. French Guiana is not a country in itself. It's instead an overseas department of France. So really, you can think of it as a state of France, all right? It acts just like a state of the United States would, except for it's way far away, okay? So it's an overseas department of France, and they send representatives, they elect representatives, and they send them to France, to French Parliament, to help make the laws and things like that. And all of the citizens of French Guiana are also citizens citizens of France. So it's not even its own country. Just think of it as another state that's kind of separated from the rest of France. Guyana and Suriname, however, they're having issues with their government. So they have a democracy, they have a president and a national assembly. So it's set up where they have some a legislative group as well as a president that has the most power. However, there's two groups fighting for the power, and so they're people of African descent, like these people down here, and then people of South Asian descent, many of them Indian, like the people right there. And so these two groups are fighting for power, and in some cases, it can be a peaceful fight for power where they're just trying to take over power and saying nasty things about each other. And in some places, it turns into riots and violence. So it's a difficult government to live in. So again, just to look a little bit further into that conflict that's happening in Guyana and Suriname between the South Asians and the Africans, there are major political issues in Guyana where people vote just based on their race, and they're just trying to gain power within their race to help their people and take away from what the other people need. Whereas in Suriname, it's out and out warfare. I mean, it's literally a civil war happening there. And so there's tons of refugees that are running away to French Guiana. They're trying to cross the border and get into French Guiana, and so they're coming to France. Now, what is a refugee? I've got the definition right there. Okay, definition of a refugee is a person who is leaving the country to escape persecution of some sort, whether it's dying or being constantly bugged or taxed or anything like that because of your religion or your ethnicity. You're trying to get away from that. That's what a refugee is. There's also conflict in Colombia. And so in Colombia, there's a group of insurgents, a group of rebels, and the United States is currently helping helping add money in to fund the fight so that hopefully the government can get control of it. And what they're trying to do is protect the United States, protect the democracy down there, because we always want to protect democracy all around the world, but also to protect the businesses that America has set up in Colombia. But of course, this whole fight is being fueled by the money from drugs, and so we're trying to fund the military so that it can fight back against these groups that are funded mostly by drugs. And a lot of these drugs are being bought in America, and so it's also becoming a problem for our citizens. Okay, and that's why the United States is involved in all of this in Colombia. In Venezuela, with this man Hugo Chavez, when he was in charge, even though he is not in charge anymore, the business owners were starting to feel like they had no vote. Okay, remember, he was moving them towards more government control and kind of moving them towards socialism, because he had taken over and he had started to give more and more and more help to the poor people and taking away power from the richer people, the landowners. Okay, and so a lot of the business owners and landowners were afraid that we're moving towards socialism, we're moving away from democracy. So let's look at the economies of these a couple of different regions in Venezuela. The oil profits are the reason that they are ever successful. I mean, they're trying to use these oil profits to make sure the prices get low, so they subsidize food and they subsidize oil, and the government's paying for parts of it so it's cheap for their people. And they were also buying a bunch of old military equipment from Russia. They're working to try to get into other industries, but Venezuela is really, really struggling. Okay, and the reason they're really struggling is because they are all dependent on oil, and right now the price of oil is pretty low. Okay, and so they're not getting any money, and they can't help out their poor people. So people are literally dying from sickness and starvation. And the reason is because Hugo Chavez, when he was in charge, he overspent. He spent too much money. Okay, he kept these poor people alive, which was what he needed to do with the profits from oil. But then the oil value and oil prices went down, and now the country is too poor to take care of the poorest people, and so people are dying. In French Guiana, one of their major economic boons is from the European Space Agency, which is kind of like their NASA. America has NASA, Europe has gone together and created a space agency, and so they have a rocket launch site in French Guiana that employs many, many people that live there. And so a lot of money goes into that. And in Colombia, they have a lot of resources as well, where in the mountains they found gold and coal and oil and emeralds. And so a lot of money goes into the mining, and then they make a good amount of money from farming as well. And so those more diverse economies of Colombia and French Guiana and some of those areas are doing better than that economy of Venezuela, which used to be doing really good, but was stuck on that one thing. All they had was oil. So that's why it's important to have a bunch of different things that you have in your country. And same thing as if you invest. If you only have one stock and that stock goes bad, you could lose all your money. If you have many stocks, then you just lose some of your money. If one of them goes bad, you can still be okay. So that's what diversification is.